Now, this week, MPs on the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee held the final session of their inquiry into leasehold reform. It follows from a government consultation launched in 2017 to examine unfair practices in the leasehold system. 5 million people have leasehold homes. That means they buy not the flat or the house or the ground it stands on, but just the right to live there for 99 years or very often much longer now in many cases. The freehold, the land, the building itself, they are owned by the freeholder, and they can charge what's called a ground rent, which the leaseholder has to pay every year. Many ground rents have been bought up by investors, and some have raised them way above inflation. That's led to calls for a total reform of leasehold, which is, after all, a form of ownership, or tenancy if you prefer, that's just about unique now to England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Well, we invited David O'Leary, who's Policy Director with the Home Builders Federation, to debate the issue with the founder and chief executive of the Home Owners Alliance and a campaigner for leaseholder reform, Paula Higgins.
It's very confusing for people because they are seen to be a tenant, a leaseholder. They have to pay ground rent to the freeholder and service charges and whatnot.
And David O'Leary, why do you think that's a good way to own your home?
I certainly don't think it's a perfect model for home ownership, but it's the model that has existed for centuries in this country. It's the most effective way I can see at the moment for multi-use buildings. Apartment blocks are generally run on a leasehold tenure. That means that there is a freeholder who stands behind the building as a long-term steward of that building, and typically the leases on these apartments newly granted are 999 years or 250 years. That tends to be the typical practice.
But I think that people don't know what they're getting themselves in for, and it's very misunderstood. And I think it's also quite patronising, the fact that when you think you're buying your property or flat, that you don't feel that you've got control over how you're going to maintain it.
There are opportunities to be involved in the maintenance and the ongoing management of the building. But ultimately, there are skills required and there are legal responsibilities that require, I would argue, some professional management.
But you don't have control. So I think if we start from scratch and look at something like the common hold system, which the legislation is there's a handful of properties that are built in that way.
Yeah, common hold is completely untested in this country. There are 16 common hold schemes in existence, as I understand it.
Yeah, so why is that? Is that because...
and the largest of those is a 30-unit caravan park.
What does common hold do? How does it work?
It means that you actually own the share of the freehold. You own the property as well, so you've got the rights and responsibilities. So it takes out the freeholder.
And it seems that common hold does work in some cases on very small schemes. If you're dealing with a more complex development of 100, 200 units, that is a lot of voices that need to be heard and lots of people who need to take legal responsibility for the health and safety and everything in that building.
The problem now is freeholders, not all of them of course, but can be making a lot of money out of these leaseholders. They're not acting on behalf of the leaseholders, they're seeing it as a way to make money. It's an investment vehicle. That's
a huge generalisation. I would argue there are effective and efficient freeholders and there are less effective and efficient freeholders. My argument would be simply to reform the system that we've got, which is currently being used by 5 million householders.
The whole leasehold system, I think, over time, needs to be abolished.
If you look at the experience of resident management companies, which has been tried by some developers, there are currently big problems in trying to get residents to be on the management company board because it entails a huge responsibility.
But David, outside England and Wales, common hold works. It's how multiply occupied blocks of flats are run. So why is it that it can't work in England?
I'm not here saying that it can't work. I'm saying the current model for common hold that is in legislation does not work and has been shown not to work. Now,
I don't
we could
know.
work
I
to
think
reform that.
It hasn't worked because developers haven't been incentivised to build because they can make money off of selling on the freehold.
Yeah,
so
but even
that's why it hasn't worked. It hasn't been tested.
Even leasehold blocks that have been taken into common hold tenure, some of them have gone back to leasehold tenure after some time.
It works in Scotland, for example, which isn't that far away, and they abolished leasehold completely. These issues have arisen partly because developers sold houses and the land they stand on, leasehold, rather than freehold, exploited people by selling the freehold on to third parties, and now those people are trapped with ground rents that are rising every year. Those are the complaints we get on Moneybox.
There have certainly been some complaints about ground rents that double every 10 years. That is a difficult thing to account for. And there are plans in place from most of the large developers and from the freeholders to try and go back and vary the terms on which those ground rents are paid.
But the stuff on offer is not good enough. They should be compensated. People should be brought back to being able to get that freehold when they were first offered it and for that low price that they were originally offered. They're still paying the solicitor's charges to change it. These people have been missold.
If people have genuinely been missold, then there is a legal route to dealing with that. I don't see that there has been evidence that people have, on a wholesale, been missold leasehold properties. People have bought leasehold properties on terms which have subsequently been discovered to be unfair or less than optimal, and people are now going back, freeholders, developers and others, and trying to change those back to RPI.
There's always the next trick. You're buying a sort of a leasehold property and you're having to pay permission to change your mortgage or to have a pet or to change your carpets. There's always ways around that people seem to be making money out of people who just want to buy a home to live in.
I would argue
that's wrong.
There have been cases that I've seen in the media where, sure, that people have been charged excessive amounts for permission fees, but I would also argue, as a leaseholder myself, that those requiring permission in multi-dwelling buildings can actually be beneficial because it's for the long term.
Paula would like it scrapped and replaced with something else. You want to reform it. What would your key reforms be?
I think we should have a cap on starting ground rents on new homes.
What does the money from a ground rent actually do? What's it spent on by the freeholder?
Well, the freeholder has the long-term responsibility for the building. It really.
Sure, but then why do they need to be paid for that? They own it. Why do they need to be paid?
Well, there are costs involved with those services.
What else would you like in your reforms?
I think there probably needs to be some tighter regulation of freeholders, because as we have seen over the past couple of years in particular, in some very sort of sensitive health and safety cases, there are freeholders who have acted responsibly to deal with issues around cladding on apartment buildings, and there are some freeholders that haven't. More should be done to make it clear the roles and responsibilities that freeholders have. Speaking as a leaseholder myself, I was unaware of the value that a freeholder creates for me. I certainly think that value is more than £10, which is what the government is currently proposing as maximum ground rent. A light has been shone on the whole leasehold system, initially because of some issues around doubling ground rents. But I don't think it's all bad, and that's the message I'd like to get across.
Your desire to have the whole thing changed, it is hugely complicated. It's been around for hundreds of years. It was clear in the Select Committee earlier this week. It's going to take a very, very long time even to fiddle around the edges. So you're just kicking this thing right into the future. Is there an immediate change you'd like?
I'd like to see a commission set up about sort of the people who are stuck in with doubling of ground rents and helping the existing leaseholders now who are in a difficult situation. I'd like sort of simplification over things like right to manage, leasehold extensions, have standardised lease contracts.
And I think some of that has happened informally over the last couple of years. There is a greater standardisation of new build leases. We have relatively low ground rents on a starting basis.
David O'Leary ending that discussion with Paula Higgins. I didn't have much to do, did I? Let us know your thoughts.